Montana Territory, 1878. The wind howled like a wounded animal across the snow-blanketed plains, carrying ice crystals that stung any exposed skin like 1,000 tiny needles. It was the kind of blizzard that separated the survivors from the dead in the unforgiving West. Isaac Prescott hunched lower in his saddle, squinting through the white wall before him, his gloved hands stiff on the reins of his chestnut gelding. At 25, he'd already learned the harsh lesson that in this territory, a man relied only on himself. "Nobody's coming to save you out here," his father had told him before consumption took him 3 winters past. Isaac lived by those words. Trust led to disappointment, attachment led to loss, and in his experience, letting others close only invited pain when they eventually left, either by choice or by the cruel hand of fate that seemed to govern this wild country. The cattle drive he'd been working had disbanded early when the storm warnings came, the trail boss paying out their wages with instructions to find shelter. The other hands had ridden for the nearest town, but Isaac, ever the loner, had chosen to push toward an abandoned line shack he knew lay several miles north. It would be simple, solitary shelter, just as he preferred his life. A gust of wind nearly unseated him, and his horse nickered nervously. "Easy, Rusty," he murmured, patting the animal's neck. "Just you and me, same as always." That was when he saw it, a dark smudge against the endless white. At first, he thought it might be a fallen tree or a boulder, but as he drew closer, the shape resolved into something that made his heart skip, a small wagon, its wheel broken, listing dangerously to one side like a sinking ship. And beside it, a figure in a heavy coat was struggling to control a panicking horse. Isaac's first instinct was to ride past. Whatever trouble this stranger had found wasn't his concern. The West claimed those who weren't prepared, and he'd seen enough death to know that stopping might mean 2 graves instead of 1 when the temperature dropped further after nightfall. But something, perhaps the last shred of the humanity he'd tried to bury beneath years of self-reliance, made him turn Rusty toward the stranded traveler. "Hello there," he called, his voice almost lost in the howling wind. "You need to get out of this storm." The figure turned, and Isaac felt his carefully constructed world tilt sideways. It was a woman, young, maybe 22 or 23, with wisps of golden blonde hair escaping from beneath her hat. Even with her face reddened by cold and wind, her beauty struck him with physical force. Her green eyes widened at the sight of him, relief and wariness battling for dominance in her expression. "Thank God," she said, her voice strong despite her predicament. "My will gave out about an hour ago." Isaac dismounted, his boots crunching in the snow. "You're lucky I came along. This storm is worsening by the minute." He assessed the situation quickly. "The wheel's beyond repair out here, and that wagon won't make it through these drifts anyway." "I need my supplies," she insisted, gesturing to the wagon's contents. "What you need is to stay alive," Isaac replied bluntly. "The line shack I'm heading for is about 2 miles north. We can come back for your things once the storm passes." She looked as if she might argue, then glanced at the darkening sky and nodded reluctantly. "I'm Priscilla Larson," she said, extending a gloved hand. "Isaac Prescott." He took her hand briefly before turning back to his horse. "Can you ride?" "Since before I could walk," she answered with a hint of pride that surprised him. Isaac helped secure her horse, then assisted her onto Rusty's back before swinging up behind her. The unexpected intimacy of their positions made him tense, but survival trumped discomfort. As they set off, the woman held tightly to the saddle horn while Isaac guided them through the worsening blizzard. "What brings you out alone in weather like this?" he asked, partly to distract them both from the biting cold. "I was returning from Helena." "Business matters," she replied. The storm came faster than expected. Isaac nodded, though she couldn't see it. Foolish to be traveling alone, he thought, but kept the judgment to himself. They all made their choices in this territory, and they all paid for them eventually. By the time they reached the line shack, both were half frozen. The small, one-room structure wasn't much, but its log walls blocked the wind, and the stone fireplace promised warmth if they could get a fire going. Isaac worked quickly, using the kindling and firewood stacked inside to build a flame, while Priscilla brought in what supplies she'd managed to grab from her horse's saddlebags. Soon, the crackling of the fire created the only comfort possible in such circumstances. "Thank you," Priscilla said as color returned to her cheeks. I'm not sure I would have survived much longer out there. Isaac shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. No, she said with certainty, those green eyes studying him. They wouldn't have. Most men out here look after themselves first. Like you were doing? Traveling alone in winter. The words came out harsher than he intended. Instead of taking offense, she smiled slightly. I've learned to rely on myself. The West isn't kind to those who can't. The echo of his own philosophy surprised him. Where are you headed? He asked, changing the subject as he removed his gloves and coat. Home. The Larson spread. Isaac paused. Larson. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. My father's ranch, north of the Yellowstone. She removed her hat, releasing a cascade of golden hair that caught the firelight. And you? Where is home for you, Mr. Prescott? Wherever I happen to be, he answered, the practiced response coming easily. I've been working cattle drives for the last few years. Before that, my family had a small homestead near Bozeman, but it's gone now. Something like understanding flickered in her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be. It's the way of things out here. They shared the jerky and hardtack from Isaac's saddlebags, making a meager but sustaining meal. As the night deepened and the storm raged outside, they talked, first in the halting way of strangers, then with growing ease. Priscilla spoke of growing up on her father's ranch, learning to ride and shoot alongside the ranch hands. Isaac found himself sharing stories of cattle drives and the characters he'd met along the trail. What he didn't share were the losses. His mother to fever when he was 12, his father to consumption, the homestead to drought and debt. You don't stay anywhere long, do you? She observed as the fire burned low. No point in it, he replied. Everything changes. People leave or die. Land gets taken. Better to keep moving. Sounds lonely. Isaac stoked the fire, avoiding her gaze. Lonely is safer than disappointed. She didn't respond immediately, and when she did, her voice was soft. My mother died when I was 16, thrown from a horse. My father followed last spring, his heart. Now it's just me. The simple statement hung between them, a shared understanding of loss that needed no further explanation. Get some sleep, Isaac said finally. I'll keep the fire going. Priscilla settled onto the rough bedroll he'd offered, while Isaac sat with his back against the wall, watching the flames and listening to the storm. He told himself it was the cold that kept him awake, not the presence of the woman sleeping a few feet away, nor the strange feeling that something important had shifted in his carefully ordered world. Dawn brought silence as the storm spent itself through the night. Isaac stepped outside to find a transformed landscape, pristine white drifts sculpted by wind, the sky a clear, painful blue. The cold remained brutal, but without the wind, it was manageable. Priscilla emerged from the shack bundled in her coat. We should go back for my wagon, she said after surveying the scene. Isaac had already saddled Rusty. The snow's deep. It'll be slow going. I appreciate your help, Mr. Prescott, but I can manage from here if you have somewhere to be. Her sudden formality caught him off guard. I've got nowhere pressing, he found himself saying. And you still need help with that broken wheel. The relief in her smile warmed him more than it should have. They reached her wagon by mid-morning. The snow had partially buried it, but the contents remained secure. Isaac dug around the broken wheel while Priscilla inventoried her supplies. Here's our problem, he called, examining the wheel. Axle's cracked too. No fixing this without proper tools. What do you suggest? She asked, coming to stand beside him. We abandon the wagon, load what we can onto the horses, and I'll escort you home. Once you're safe, I can send someone back for the rest. She considered this, then nodded. That's sensible. Thank you. They worked together to salvage what they could, securing bundles to both horses. By noon, they were headed north toward the Larson ranch, the horses struggling through snow that sometimes reached their chests in the deeper drifts. It's about 20 miles, Priscilla said as they rode side by side through a more open stretch. We'll never make it by nightfall in these conditions. There's another line shack about halfway, Isaac replied. We can shelter there tonight and reach your place tomorrow. She studied him curiously. You know this country well for a drifter. Isaac shrugged. Worked a few ranches in these parts over the years. You learn the landscape. Which ranches? Crossed Creek, Hayward's place before he lost it to the bank, drove cattle for the Double T one season. A strange expression crossed Priscilla's face. But never the Larson spread? No, Isaac admitted. Heard it was a big operation. Never had occasion to work there. She smiled faintly. It is a big operation. They rode in companionable silence for several miles. The only sounds the crunch of snow beneath hooves and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. Isaac found himself stealing glances at his companion, noting the determined set of her jaw and the capable way she handled her horse through difficult terrain. She was unlike any woman he'd encountered in his years of drifting. Neither the rough-edged saloon girls nor the proper town ladies who viewed cowboys as little better than the dust they carried. "What will you do after you've seen me home?" Priscilla asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Isaac hadn't thought that far ahead. "Move on, I suppose. Maybe head down to Wyoming for the spring roundup." "Always moving," she observed, never stopping long enough to put down roots. "Roots get torn up," he said simply. She nodded as if he'd confirmed something she'd suspected. "My father used to say a man without roots is like a tumbleweed, at the mercy of every wind that blows." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," she agreed. "Stubborn as the day is long, but wise in his way." The second-line shack proved smaller than the first, little more than a hunter's shelter, but it offered walls against the night wind and a small stove that soon radiated precious heat. They ate the last of Isaac's provisions and some of the supplies they'd salvaged from Priscilla's wagon. "Tell me about your ranch," Isaac said as they huddled near the stove, exhaustion making his voice rougher than usual. Priscilla's face softened with pride. "It started with 100 acres and 20 head of cattle. My father built it up over 30 years, acre by acre, cow by cow. Now it spans nearly 50,000 acres from the foothills to the river." Isaac whistled low. "That's substantial." "It is," she agreed. "We run over 5,000 head of cattle, breed some of the finest horses in the territory, and employ nearly 40 men year-round." The scale surprised him. "And you manage all this yourself now?" "I do," she said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "I grew up learning every aspect of ranching from my father. He made sure I could do a man's work long before he passed, knowing the ranch would be mine alone someday." "Most men wouldn't prepare a daughter that way," Isaac observed. "My father wasn't most men," she replied simply. "And I'm not most daughters." That much was evident. As they settled for the night, Isaac found himself wondering what it would be like to have something worth staying for, land that was yours, work with purpose beyond the next payday. He'd abandoned such thoughts years ago, after watching his family's small homestead slip away despite his father's backbreaking labor. Morning brought clearer trails and faster travel. As they crested a rise around midday, Isaac pulled up short at the vista before them. Spread across the valley below was the largest ranch he'd ever seen. Outbuildings, corrals, and a main house that could only be described as a mansion by frontier standards, all surrounded by vast expanses of snow-covered pasture. "Welcome to the Larson Ranch," Priscilla said quietly beside him. Isaac stared in disbelief. "This is your place?" "This is home," she confirmed. As they rode down toward the ranch headquarters, activity became visible. Men working in the corrals, smoke rising from bunkhouse chimneys, the business of a major operation continuing despite winter's grip. Several riders noticed their approach and came out to meet them, hands hovering near sidearms until they recognized Priscilla. "Miss Larson," called a gray-haired man who pushed his horse ahead of the others. "Thank the Lord. When you didn't return yesterday, we were about to send out search parties." "I'm fine, Mr. Sullivan," she assured him. "My wagon broke down in the blizzard. Mr. Prescott here saved my life." All eyes turned to Isaac, evaluating him with the careful scrutiny of men responsible for protecting valuable property, and, clearly, a valued employer. "We're grateful, sir," Sullivan said, though his expression remained cautious. "Miss Larson is precious to us all." They were escorted to the main house, where servants rushed to take their horses and usher them inside. Isaac found himself standing awkwardly in an entrance hall more elegant than any hotel he'd ever entered, acutely aware of the trail dust on his clothes and the stubble on his jaw. "Please prepare a hot bath and meal for Mr. Prescott," Priscilla instructed a housekeeper, "and have the blue guest room made ready." To Isaac, she added, "You'll stay tonight, of course. It's the least I can offer after your help." Before he could respond, she was swept away by Sullivan and several other men who clearly had urgent ranch business to discuss with her. A maid led Isaac upstairs to a bedroom larger than most bunkhouses he'd slept in, where a steaming bath was soon prepared. Clean, shaved, and wearing borrowed clothes that fit surprisingly well, Isaac descended to find dinner being served in a dining room dominated by a massive oak table. Only Priscilla awaited him. The ranch business apparently concluded for the evening. "You look refreshed," she said, rising to greet him. She had changed into a deep blue dress that complemented her eyes and had her golden hair arranged elegantly. The transformation from trail-worn traveler to ranch mistress was remarkable. "Thank you for the hospitality," Isaac replied, feeling out of place despite the clean clothes. "Your home is impressive. Please sit," she invited. "We rarely have guests who aren't business associates. It's nice to dine with someone who isn't trying to buy cattle or sell me equipment." The meal that followed was the finest Isaac had eaten in years. Roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread still warm from the oven, and apple pie with cream for dessert. Throughout dinner, Priscilla asked about his life on the trail, seeming genuinely interested in his experiences. "You've seen more of the West than most," she observed as they finished their coffee. "Moving keeps a man from getting too comfortable," he said, repeating the philosophy that had guided him since his family's homestead was lost. "And is comfort such a terrible thing?" she asked, her direct gaze challenging him. Isaac set down his cup. "Comfort makes you vulnerable. It makes losing things hurt worse. So you choose to have nothing worth losing?" Her words struck uncomfortably close to truth. "I choose freedom." "Freedom and emptiness often look similar from a distance," she said softly. Before he could respond, Sullivan appeared at the doorway. "Pardon the interruption, Miss Larson, but Peterson's here about those breeding contracts." Priscilla nodded. "Tell him I'll be right there." As Sullivan withdrew, she turned back to Isaac. "Ranch business never stops, I'm afraid. Please, make yourself comfortable. We can continue our conversation later if you're amenable." Left alone, Isaac wandered through the house, taking in the evidence of generations of success. Photographs showing the ranch's growth, trophies from livestock exhibitions, the accumulated wealth of decades of careful management. It was everything his father had dreamed of but never achieved. He eventually found himself in a study lined with books. A large desk dominated one end, papers organized in neat stacks, speaking to Priscilla's methodical management of her inheritance. Isaac was examining a map of the ranch territories when her voice came from behind him. "My father spent 40 years building this legacy," she said. "Every acre hard-won, every success earned through sacrifice." Isaac turned to find her watching him from the doorway. "He created something remarkable." "Yes," she agreed, entering the room. "But lately I've been wondering if a legacy is truly complete if there's no one to share it with, no one to pass it on to." The personal nature of her comment caught him off guard. "I'm sure there's no shortage of men who'd be interested in a partnership with the owner of the largest ranch in the territory." A shadow of something like hurt crossed her features. "Yes, there are many who'd marry the Larson Ranch and tolerate its current caretaker as part of the bargain." Isaac immediately regretted his words. "I didn't mean—" "It's fine," she interrupted. "It's the reality I've faced since taking over. Men who see the land and the cattle, but not the woman." An uncomfortable silence fell between them. Finally, Isaac spoke. "For what it's worth, I saw the woman before I knew about the ranch." Her expression softened. "Yes, I believe you did." She moved to stand beside him at the map. "Tomorrow, Sullivan can escort you wherever you'd like to go. With full pay for your assistance, of course." "That's not necessary. I insist," she said firmly. "We pay our debts at the Larson Ranch." Isaac studied her profile in the lamplight. "Then I'll accept with thanks and be on my way." Was it disappointment he glimpsed in her eyes? But she merely nodded. "Very well. Good night, Mr. Prescott." "Good night, Miss Larson." Isaac slept poorly despite the comfortable bed, his mind churning with unfamiliar thoughts. For the first time in years, the prospect of moving on to the next job, the next bunkhouse, the next stretch of lonely trail, left him feeling hollow rather than free. He told himself it was just the contrast with the luxury he'd briefly experienced. Any man would find it hard to return to trail life after such comfort. But he knew it wasn't the feather mattress or hot bath he was reluctant to leave behind. Morning came with clear skies and the sounds of a working ranch already in full swing. Isaac dressed in his own clothes, now cleaned and pressed, and made his way downstairs. He found Priscilla in the dining room, dressed for writing and reviewing documents while she ate. "Good morning," she greeted him, setting aside her papers. "I hope you slept well." Best bet I've had in years, he replied truthfully. They ate breakfast amid discussion of his departure plans. Sullivan would accompany him to the nearest town, where Isaac could catch the stagecoach headed south if he wished. Or, Priscilla said with careful casualness, we could use an experienced hand here, if you're interested in steadier work for the winter. The offer surprised him. You don't know anything about my skills. I know you kept a clear head in a blizzard, found shelter, and put someone else's safety before your own, she countered. Those are qualities I value in my men. Before Isaac could respond, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the pounding of hooves, and the crash of breaking wood. They rushed to the porch to find chaos in the main corral, where a massive black stallion was rearing and plunging, having broken through the rail fence. Ranch hands scattered as the horse charged, wild-eyed with panic. That's Thunder, Priscilla exclaimed. He'll kill himself or someone else if we don't calm him. Without thinking, Isaac vaulted over the porch railing and ran toward the fractured corral. The stallion wheeled at his approach, nostrils flaring, but Isaac slowed his pace, keeping his movements steady and his voice low. Easy, big fellow, he murmured. Easy now. The horse pawed the ground, tossing its magnificent head. Isaac continued his careful approach, speaking softly, until he was close enough to reach out. The stallion snorted and backed away, but didn't bolt. Gradually, Isaac worked his way to the trailing lead rope, and with one quick movement, secured it. The horse tested him, pulling back hard, but Isaac held firm, continuing his gentle talk until the animal began to settle. Only when the stallion stood quietly did Isaac lead him back toward the damaged corral, where wide-eyed ranch hands waited. Never seen anyone approach Thunder that way, Sullivan said as Isaac handed over the lead rope. That horse has thrown every man who's tried to ride him. He's not mean, Isaac observed, stroking the stallion's neck. Just scared and proud. He needs patience, not force. When he turned back toward the house, he found Priscilla watching him with an expression that made his heart beat faster. That offer of employment, he said when he reached her. Is it still open? Her smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. It is. Then I accept. For the winter, at least. The weeks that followed transformed Isaac's understanding of himself and his place in the world. The Larson Ranch operated with a precision and purpose unlike the haphazard outfits he'd worked for previously. Under Sullivan's guidance, he learned the complexities of managing a large cattle operation, breeding records, grazing rotations, the careful balance of expansion and conservation that had made the ranch so successful. And then there was Priscilla. He saw her daily, reviewing ledgers in the office, riding out to check on distant herds, negotiating with cattle buyers, settling disputes among the hands. She worked as hard as any man on the place, yet maintained a dignity and composure that commanded respect from everyone around her. Isaac found himself assigned to breaking the younger horses, a task at which his patience and gentle approach proved invaluable. The success with Thunder had established his reputation, and soon he was training the ranch's most valuable animals. You have a gift, Priscilla told him one evening as they walked back from the stables. A month had passed since his arrival, and their relationship had evolved into something like friendship, though Isaac sensed undercurrents he dared not acknowledge. Just experience, he demurred. Horses respond to kindness better than force. As do most creatures, she agreed, including people. Their walks became a regular occurrence, moments stolen between her endless responsibilities and his long days of training horses. Sometimes they discussed ranch business, but increasingly, their conversations turned personal. Isaac shared stories of his childhood, the dreams his father had for their small homestead, the devastation of watching it slip away after his death. Is that when you decided to keep moving? She asked one snowy evening as they stood by the corral, watching the horses in the fading light. Seemed easier than watching something else I cared about be taken away, he admitted. So you care about nothing? I didn't say that, he replied softly, meeting her gaze. The moment stretched between them, taut with possibility, until Sullivan's arrival with a telegram shattered it. Priscilla was called away, and Isaac returned to the bunkhouse, unsettled by the feelings he could no longer deny. Winter deepened, bringing Christmas celebrations that included a feast for all the ranch workers and a dance in the main barn. Isaac found himself paired with Priscilla for several dances, her hand light in his, her laughter warming him more than the whiskey being passed among the men. You clean up well for a drifter, she teased as they circled the floor. And you dance well for a cattlewoman, he returned, enjoying the flash of pleasure in her eyes. Later, they stood outside in the crisp night air, their breath forming clouds in the moonlight. Will you really leave when spring comes? She asked, her voice carefully neutral. Isaac looked out over the ranch, the buildings solid against the winter night, the land stretching away under its blanket of snow, everything speaking of permanence and belonging. I don't know, he admitted. For the first time in years, moving on doesn't feel like freedom. It feels like running. What are you running from, Isaac? He turned to face her. Fear, I suppose. Fear of caring too much. Fear of losing again. Some things are worth the risk of loss, she said quietly. Before he could respond, one of the hands called for Priscilla, some minor crisis requiring the boss's attention. The moment passed, but Isaac carried her words with him through the long night. January brought a week of severe cold that tested even the hardiest ranch hands. Isaac worked alongside the others, breaking ice on water holes, distributing hay to cattle huddled against the wind, keeping the essential operations running in temperatures that could kill a man in hours if he wasn't careful. It was during this cold snap that riders from the neighboring Davidson ranch arrived with news that chilled Isaac more than the bitter weather. Rustlers had hit several spreads to the east, making off with prize breeding stock and leaving 2 ranch hands dead. They're working their way west, Davidson's foreman reported grimly. Thought you should know, Miss Larson. Your bloodstock would be mighty tempting. Priscilla called a meeting of her senior hands that evening. Double the night guards on the horse pastures, she instructed. No one rides alone until we know these men are caught or gone from the territory. Sullivan nodded. I'll organize the men into teams. Prescott, you know those horses better than anyone. I want you supervising their protection personally. The responsibility surprised Isaac, but he accepted it without hesitation. Over the next week, he slept little, dividing his time between the stables and the pastures where the most valuable horses were kept. The threat of rustlers brought attention to the ranch that everyone felt, but Isaac found himself more concerned for Priscilla's safety than the horses. His worry proved prescient. 10 days after Davidson's warning, Isaac was checking the far pasture when he heard gunshots from the direction of the main house. He spurred his horse without hesitation, riding hard through the gathering dusk. As he crested the rise overlooking the ranch headquarters, he saw 5 riders surrounding Priscilla and Sullivan as they returned from a trip to a distant part of the property. Even from a distance, Isaac recognized the tableau for what it was, an ambush. He didn't stop to consider odds or consequences. Drawing his revolver, he rode straight toward the confrontation, firing twice into the air to create confusion. The rustlers wheeled at the new threat, giving Priscilla and Sullivan the moment they needed to seek cover behind a rocky outcropping. What followed was a chaotic exchange of gunfire. Isaac dismounted and worked his way closer, using the terrain for cover. He glimpsed Priscilla with Sullivan's rifle, firing with a steady precision that surprised him even as it increased his admiration. The firefight seemed to last hours, but was over in minutes. 2 rustlers lay wounded, 1 dead, and 2 had fled into the gathering darkness. Ranch hands, alerted by the gunfire, arrived to secure the survivors. Isaac found Priscilla behind the rocks, her face pale but composed, Sullivan bleeding from a graze to his shoulder beside her. Are you hurt? He demanded, scanning her for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him. Thanks to you. Their eyes held for a long moment, the shared danger creating an intimacy that transcended words. Then Sullivan groaned, breaking the spell, and they turned their attention to getting the wounded man back to the ranch. That night, after the doctor had treated Sullivan and the wounded rustlers were locked in a storeroom awaiting the marshal, Isaac found Priscilla alone in her study, a glass of whiskey untouched before her. You should rest, he said from the doorway. It's been a long day. She looked up, her composure finally showing cracks. I keep seeing it. That moment when I thought we were both going to die. If you hadn't come when you did. But I did, he said simply, entering the room. Why? She asked, surprising him. Why risk yourself for us? Isaac realized the truth in that moment, a truth he'd been avoiding for weeks. Because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. The admission hung between them, too honest to be withdrawn. Priscilla rose from her chair, crossing to stand before him. I've watched you these past months, she said softly. Seen how you care for the horses, how you work with the men, how you've begun to put down roots here without even realizing it. I've spent years believing that not caring was safer, he confessed. That if I kept moving, kept everything temporary, I'd never have to feel the pain of loss again. And now I understand that some things are worth the risk. He reached out, hesitantly touching her cheek. Some people are worth any risk. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and answer exchanged without words. The second was deeper, an acknowledgement of feelings that had grown steadily since that first meeting in the blizzard. When they finally drew apart, Priscilla smiled up at him. Stay, she said simply. Not just for winter. Stay for spring, for summer, for all the seasons to come. Are you offering me a permanent job, Miss Larson? He asked, a smile tugging at his lips. I'm offering you a partnership, she replied seriously. In every sense of the word. This ranch needs more than a manager or a foreman. It needs someone who cares for it as I do, who sees its potential and its worth. The men might not take kindly to the drifter you rescued suddenly giving orders. They respect you already, she countered. They've seen your work, your judgment, your willingness to risk yourself for others. The rest will come with time. Isaac took her hands in his. I need to be clear. It's not the ranch I'm staying for, though I've come to love this land. It's you, Priscilla. Just you. Her smile was radiant. I know. Spring came to Montana with its usual caprice. Warm days followed by sudden snowstorms, the land slowly shedding its winter coat to reveal new grass beneath. The rustlers had been tried and sentenced, their threat eliminated. The Larson Ranch thrived under its shared leadership, with Isaac bringing new ideas for horse breeding that promised to expand their reputation further. On a perfect May morning, with wildflowers painting the meadows in swaths of color, Isaac and Priscilla exchanged vows beneath an arch of twisted willow branches. The entire ranch turned out for the celebration, along with ranchers and townspeople from miles around, all curious to see the man who had won both the heart of Priscilla Larson and a share in the largest ranch in the territory. Not bad for a drifter who once thought caring was a weakness, Sullivan observed as he shook Isaac's hand at the reception. I just needed something worth staying for, Isaac replied, his gaze finding his bride across the crowded yard. Later, as they danced under lantern light in the same barn where they'd first danced at Christmas, Priscilla leaned close to whisper in his ear. Are you happy, Mr. Prescott? Isaac looked around at the ranch that had become his home, at the people who had accepted him as one of their own, and finally at the woman in his arms who had taught him that some risks were worth taking. Happier than I ever thought possible, Mrs. Prescott. As they stepped out into the spring night, the stars spread above them like diamonds on velvet. Isaac finally understood what his father had sought but never found. Not just land or livestock or buildings, but a place of belonging, a home in the truest sense. He had spent years believing that attachment led inevitably to loss, that the only safety lay in constant movement. Now, with Priscilla's hand in his and the vast Larson ranch, their ranch, spreading around them, he embraced the truth she had shown him. That love, despite its risks, was the greatest freedom of all.